Hello, welcome to this Warley production. So in this video we're going to show you how to turn a basic Hornby Halt into this lovely finished painted building. So you can see from the start of the building we've given the plastic a wash with soapy water. You can take the roof off so you can break it down into the two components, which makes it really easy to work on and paint. So the first thing we're going to do after washing it is to give it a quick coat of paint. So we're going to use a primer. So I'm using XF19 Tamiya acrylic paints through the airbrush, 50-50 mix with Tamiya X20A. So the idea of the primer coat, it just gives, when you do the painting further along, it just gives it a nicer finished, so it's got something for the paint to stick to, and you'll find painting any model is much easier once you've got a primer coat on. So the idea of the primer coat is nice thin coats, applying the paint thinly. If the paint starts to look wet, take the airbrush away or take the paint away, just let the air flow through the airbrush, drive the paintwork back, and then move and keep the model moving. You want nice thin coats, as I've said, so you build up the layers slowly. So working our way slowly around the whole of the model, trying different angles, trying to get into all the different corners, and we're going to paint the inside and the outside with the XF19 just to give it a good base layer before we move any further. We'll get this painted and then we'll put it aside and let it dry off. Give it a good couple of hours to dry before we start doing anything else with it. The good thing about priming is primer will pick up any faults, especially if you've done any filling work or sanding work. You'll pick up any faults when you apply a primer coat, so you can go back and touch up or neaten up or do a bit more sanding where required. So we'll get this paint primed up, and like I said, we'll leave it to dry until we do the next layer of painting. So primer coats are now done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the interiors. So for that I'm using Tamiya XF white, XF2, which is a flat white, and just to give the paintwork more of an aged look, I'm going to pick up a bit of XF57, which is a buff colour, and mix it in the colour cup with the white paint. So the idea is it just gives the white paint more of an aged look. It's very rarely you see white paint which is pure white in the real world. It tends to look a bit, once it's been up a year or so, a couple of years, it starts to go that creamy colour. So by adding a bit of buff paint, it just naturally weathers the inside of the building. So again, we just go around the whole of the inside of the building with the white. Do the roof. I've done the windows in this sort of buff colour as well, so picking a bit more paint up. Just run out. So again, X20A 50-50 mix, 20A white paint, and then just a brush full of buff paint just to take the colour away, take the whiteness away. So I think I was running out of white paint there, so just a bit of buff, mix it up, stir it up in the colour cup, and then carry on. So I'm painting the underside and just going back round the inside again. and again doing the window frames. So obviously you don't need to use an airbrush. You could do this with a normal paintbrush if you want to. Sometimes I find that an airbrush is a lot quicker to do things, and sometimes it's easier just to do it with a paintbrush. But for the interior, to get into all the corners and working your way around the model, I just found it a lot easier with the airbrush for this. And you get a nice, especially with white. Some colours it is easier to paint with an airbrush than it is to paint. So sort of whites and yellows, I always tend to find it easier to paint with an airbrush. So again, once it's finished, put it aside, let it dry off, go back to the roof. Once that's let it dry, and just go around checking I've not missed anything. So again, going around the window frames again. Once you're happy with it, it's a case of leaving it to dry off now, and then once it's dry, we'll come back and do the next stage. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to a paintbrush. So what I'm using the Tamiya paint retarder. The idea of the Tamiya paint retarder is just to slow down the time it takes for the paint to dry. So you get better coverage. The paint self levels better because you're slowing that bit slower. The paint for on the woodwork, what I'm using the Vallejo paint. So it's a white top paint, so it's designed to be used with a brush rather than an airbrush, and it's the mahogany brown. So I'm just painting the tabletops and some of the interior benchwork and seating inside the building. I could use the airbrush, but again, for this sort of job, by the time you try to get inside with masking tape and mask it all off, it'd be just easy to do with a paintbrush. That's what I've done. So I'm using what I've done now. We've got a bottle cap. So like the retarder's gone in, a couple of drops of retarder, a couple of drops of paint, and I'm just giving it slowly, working my way around with a paintbrush. It's really hard to show what you're doing, but just in case of slowly working your way around, take your time, so you get a nice neat finish. Don't use a big brush, but just work your way around the model, and then painting the underside of the benches and the then flip it over and do the upper edge as well. But with painting, the key thing is to take your time. There's not an expensive paintbrushes, they're just the humble ones you get in a pack of 4. I think they're a couple of quid, so they're not expensive paintbrushes. But the main thing is you want a nice sort of thin paint. You don't want it to be too thick, but you don't want it to be sort of too thin so it sort of it goes on clear. But you want a nice flowing paint, and the idea is you want it to self level as it dries, then you don't get the sort of brush marks in the paint. So yeah, just working my way around, painting the benches. Like you see, you can just see there painted the desk in the office, and it just gives it a nice sort of effect rather than just the plain plastic. And it makes the benches sort of stand out. So you can see most of the video has been sped up because the video would have been too long. So I tried to show you everything I'm doing, but I've obviously sped this up. And there you go. So you can see the finished benches and look quite neat. So again, let that dry off fully, and then we'll get to the next stage, which is painting the fireplace. So for this, I've used a Mr. Hobby metallizer paint. And what I've used is dark iron. So this is a buffable paint. So the idea is just you paint it on, you let it paint it on quite thickly, let it dry. But if you go back over it with a brush, or you can rub it with a finger, you can buff the paint up and you can get sort of a shine. Being a fireplace, I don't want it to be too shiny, but you get that sort of it looks more of a three-dimensional object, because you can get shadows and shining edges. You can use it for dry brushing, to give like a worn look, but it works quite well with the fireplace. And again, I've just gone back in to give it a bit of a buff. Once it's dried back, you can buff it up with a brush. With this one, I had to add a bit more paint, so I've just gone back and added another coat of paint to it, but it makes it pop out and it stands out against that sort of off-white wall. The next thing I'm doing is I'm using a again Vallejo paint. I'm using a light brown. So the idea is this is to give it the sort of Great Western stone colours, stone 1, stone 3 paints, but they're used on Great Western buildings. I didn't really want to go down the enamel route, so I wanted to use acrylic paints on this. So what we've used, again, we used Tamiya paint retarder in a bottle cap with some of the light brown paint. We're just going to give it a first coat of paint to see how it looks. So we're just doing all the woodwork. Again, I could have done it with an airbrush, but I found it easier to paint on with a paintbrush. So we just work our way around the model. Again, this is quite sped up again, so you get takes, just so you don't get too bored. But it's a case, work your way around. The good thing with acrylic paints, they're quite forgiving, so if you do make a mistake, which you'll probably see I do make a mistake on the window frame a bit later on, if you've got a cotton bud or a paper towel, bit of damp, bit of moisture on, and all you can do is you can wipe up any mistakes. So it is quite forgiving if you make a mistake and you go over a line. So you're not, because it's all acrylic paints, you don't need solvents. So slowly working your way around, and you'll find the paint, and being acrylic, the paint dries fairly quickly as well. So you can work your way around all the different parts of the all 4 sides, and by the time you've got to the third side, the first side is near enough dry. So I'm just painting around the window frames, carefully painting it in, cutting it in. So I don't want to paint the window frames, not by choice anyway. Yeah, you can see it's starting to come together now. You can see it's quite a nice finish. That's only a first coat, so in the end I'll give it a second, because it was a bit patchy once it was dry. We'll give it a second coat, and you'll see the difference. The second coat makes a big difference. It just starts to the colours start to pop with the second coat. But the main thing is take your time and try and get it right first time, so you don't need to go back and do touching up on the white, because it looks neat, because obviously we mix the colour in the airbrush, so it's not a perfect colour. It's a sort of dulled down, weathered white sort of effect. So it starts to get a bit harder now, because I'm now painted the third side. You're sort of spinning it round on that front edge. Try not to get touch where you already painted. A couple of places where I'm touching up again, but I think I've just caught it as I've toned it round. So again, run out of paint, so a bit of a top up, so a bit more painting, tiny bit of paint retarder. Again, like I said, just to slow down the process in which the paint dries. Give it a good stir up. So you can buy painting palettes to paint the to mix paints in, but bottle caps are free, so I just tend to use those to do the same job, and then after using them you just throw them away. So to select the lower sides, the front side, and the dry before we go paint the front edge. We'll go on to the sort of the valance. I think my camera memory card sort of run out, so that's why we sort of skipped ahead. So what I've done now is, after the first coat dried off, I looked at it, it was a bit patchy, so what I've done is we've got the colour paint out again, a thinner mix this time, so it's not quite as thick as the first time. It's a lot more sort of paint retarder in, and we're just doing the second coat where the in between or the framework on the in the woodwork. So we're giving that a second coat, and you can really see the colour sort of it's a bit more of a solid colour now. Looks a lot tidier, looks a lot neater, and it just tidies it all up. One thing you'll notice, I'm working in sections, so I'm trying to get one section done at a time, so hopefully it gives the paint a chance to self-level before you move on to the next section. I know I keep mentioning self-leveling, but it is really important to get that nice finish on the paintwork. If you don't, you end up with sort of brush marks and the paint doesn't look as neat as it could do. So it's all about trying to get as nice a finish as possible. So again, we're working our way around. You tend to find the second coat goes on a lot better than the first coat, especially being a wee bit thinner. It goes on the model a lot better. Again, I've sort of put it down, let the paint dry off a bit before I go back and so I'm painting the canopy again. The canopy, the roof's had a coat of dark iron paint. So just working our way around, painting the valance and the canopy on the front and all around the sides. It's quite easy to hold that in the middle and sort of spin it around on your finger, so it's, again, put it behind to dry, then work on the other two sides because if you give the other sides a chance to dry back, you don't get fingerprints in it that way. Takes a bit longer, but the last thing you want to do is get a really nice finish and then end up getting sort of a fingerprint. As you can see there, I just sort of that's where I dropped the boo-boo and got a bit of paint on the window frame. So again, wet cotton bud wiped it off, and it's sorted the issue out. It's really important to get your paint right into the corners and work your way out from the corners and then fill in between. There you go. Just case working on the front edge now. I don't know if you can pick up how well or how much better the second coat makes to the paint. It looks, to the naked eye, it makes such a big difference. I don't know how much it picks up on the camera. And there you go, there's the finished the item with the second coat. So what we're going to do is go back with a Vallejo red leather, and we're going to paint the framework and all the trim around the door frame, paint the door, so leave the panels in the middle. Around the notice board, we're going to paint that in the dark red, in the red leather, just to frame it in. It needs to, it stops it from becoming just a block colour. Then it just gives it a nicer finish. Looks a bit more prototypical. Before we do that, I'm just going to give the roof a second coat of dark iron. So again, if you're trying to work in sections, so the idea is that you do, again, you want that sort of self-leveling effect. So you don't want it sort of the paint drying before you move on to the next sections. You want it to, the paint to be still wet as you're moving along. But again, the second coat just made the roof pop. It give it a much solider finish, nicer look. Again, don't forget to pick out the edges. So again, you work your way around slowly and just tidy it up. Okay, the main thing with these sort of projects is to take your time, let the paints fully dry before you add the next sort of coat. Okay, so now I'm going to do the add the red leather, which is the stone free sort of colour. So again, the idea is really just to highlight all the areas, so the joists where the under the roof, around the framework, and it makes a big difference. It just tidies the whole thing up and gives it a much nicer sort of look. The building looks a bit more finished. So again, paint retarder, Tamiya paint retarder, and some Vallejo paint. So the code for that one is 70818. Again, mix it up, and then again take your time. Nice small paintbrush, and then just a case of working your way around the model slowly. There you go, so that work's now done. So it's looking quite neat. So what I want to do now is gives the model a bit of a weathered look. So what I've done with that is I've got myself again bottle cap, put some little bit of tap water in the bottom, and I'm mixing just a paintbrush full of black paint into the cap full of water. So it's making a wash, a very thin wash. So give it a good stir up. Like I said, it's a nice, really thin wash you want for this. You don't want it to be thick. So when you put it onto the kitchen towel, it's almost translucent. It's almost clear. Yeah, it's moving it so it's more into the model's more into view. So what I do is turn it around. Start on the back, because it's you know, you're a bit scared of, you know, ruining the work you've done. But all you do then is sort of paint the wash on. You can see it's really thin. So the idea, I don't want to paint the whole model. I just want to get the wash into the lines between the boards, so you get that sort of that bit of a grime look, so where dust is built up. And when you paint it on, you think, oh my god, what have I done wrong? Am I doing the right thing? Am I going to make a mess? But you just got to be spare with it and pay patience and wait for the wash to do its thing, because what it'll do, the wash will find the lowest point, so it'll sink into the panel lines. It's almost like a panel line wash. What I'm doing with the roof now is I'm using different shades of grey. So I'm using XF54, which is a lighter grey than the dark iron, and I'm just going to do some dry brushing now. So I'm going to dry brush the different shades of grey onto the roof, just to give the roof a better colour. So it's not just again, I don't want this sort of brick look. I want different variations in the colour, so it looks like corrugated. So again, just different directions, dry brushing on, paint onto the brush, load the brush up, take as much paint off as you possibly can onto a piece of paper towel, then dry brush over the roof. And again, it's quite subtle, but you can see there's a bit of a colour variation in the roof. Then it's not just a solid colour, because it's very rare you see solid colours in the real world, so you want that sort of almost that textured look to it. So there's a definition. And there you go. So that's the finished model. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll speak to you soon.